There is a lake in the northern part of Michigan, small and deep and ringed all the way around with old pines. And on its quiet north shore there stands a cabin where, for more than 40 years, the door was never once locked. Not in the deep of winter, when the snow came sideways off the water and the road in went unplowed for weeks. Not on the long summer nights, when the loons called across the dark and there was no one at all to hear them but the man who lived there. He left that door on the latch, the way you keep a chair pulled out for someone you're expecting, even when, year after year, no one ever came up the road. This is the story of that door, and of the young woman who finally walked through it, and of everything that had been waiting on the other side. So let that be where we start tonight. Get comfortable wherever you are. Let the day go slack in your hands, the way a rope goes slack when the boat finally drifts to rest. There is nothing you need to fix in the next little while, and nowhere you need to be. Let your breathing slow down until it finds the rhythm of water moving against a wooden dock. That soft and patient sound, in and out, in and out. And let my voice carry you north, to the pines, to the lake, to a summer that changed a whole family without a single raised voice. Her name was Hannah, and when the phone rang on a warm evening in the middle of June, she almost didn't answer it. She was 29 years old, a third-grade teacher in Grand Rapids, and it was the very end of the school year, that hollowed-out week when the classroom has already been stripped to its bones, the little chairs stacked, the walls bare, the whole room echoing in a way it never did when the children were in it. She was tired down in her marrow. She had graded the last of the reading journals, hugged the last sticky goodbye, and driven home to a small apartment that always felt a little too quiet in the summers, when the shape of her days came loose and she wasn't sure what to fill them with anymore. The number was one she didn't know, with a northern area code, and something in her, some worn-down instinct, told her to let it go to voicemail. But she answered anyway, the way you sometimes do when you're too tired to decide. A woman's voice, careful and kind, asked if she was Hannah Bennett, granddaughter of the late Raymond Bennett. Yes, she said, sitting up a little. The woman introduced herself as an attorney named Alvarez, calling from a small firm up near a town called Alder, and she was sorry to be the one to tell her that Hannah's great-uncle, Walter Bennett, had passed away peacefully at his cabin the week before, at the age of 79. Hannah sat very still on the edge of her couch. Walter Bennett. Walt. The name landed in her chest like a stone dropped into deep water, sending up ripples of something she couldn't quite name. She knew the name, of course. Everyone in the family knew the name. But it was a name that had always been spoken in a particular way, in a lowered voice, at the far end of a hallway, with a quick glance to make sure the children weren't listening. Uncle Walt. The one who left, the one who took the money, the one nobody talked about. And now a stranger was telling her he was dead, and that, for reasons the lawyer could not explain over the phone, he had left everything he owned to her. She had to ask the woman to repeat it. To her, the lawyer said again. A cabin on the north shore of a lake called Half Moon, a workshop, a few acres of pine, an old truck and a modest bank account. And one more thing, the lawyer added. A small thing, though he had made a point of it in his instructions. A shoebox. He had asked that she be given a shoebox that he kept on the kitchen table and that no one open it before her. Hannah stood at her window while the woman talked about paperwork and a will and something called a small estate affidavit, and she looked out at the parking lot going gold in the evening light, and she thought, I have to call my father. But she didn't call him, not that night. She sat with it instead, turning the strangeness of it over and over, because the truth was that Hannah had met her great-uncle Walt exactly once, and she had never known it until now. Or rather, she had met a stranger once, and only in this moment, standing at her window, did she begin to suspect who that stranger might have been. It had been at her grandfather Raymond's funeral, 14 years earlier, when Hannah was 15. A grey, rainy morning, a small church, folding chairs. And near the very back, alone, an old man in a good coat gone shiny at the elbows, standing apart from everyone, holding his hat in both hands, like a man who wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. She had noticed him, the way a teenager notices things at the edges of a grief that isn't fully hers yet. No one spoke to him. No one shook his hand. He stood through the whole service by himself, and when it was over and the rain was coming down hard on the little gravel lot, Hannah had seen him standing under the eave with no umbrella, waiting. And she had done the small thing you do at 15 when you don't yet know all the reasons not to. She'd walked over with the big black umbrella from her mum's car, and she'd walked him out to his truck, an old pickup parked all the way at the far end. He'd thanked her softly. And then he had looked at her for a long moment, this stranger, with eyes that were wet in a way the rain didn't explain, and he'd said, "You have your great-grandmother's kindness. Alice would have liked you." And then he'd driven away, and she'd gone back inside and forgotten him, the way you forget a face in a crowd. Only now, all these years later, alone in her apartment with a dead man's name ringing in her ears, did Hannah understand. That had been Walt. Her great-uncle had driven 4 hours to stand at the back of his own brother's funeral, unwelcome, unspoken to, just to say goodbye from a distance. And the one person in that whole church who had shown him a moment's kindness was a 15-year-old girl with an umbrella, who hadn't even known his name. And now that man was gone, and he had left her a cabin on a lake and a shoebox she wasn't allowed to open until she got there. When she finally called her father, Tom, 2 days later, the conversation went the way she had been afraid it would. Her dad was a good man, steady and quiet, a man who had spent 35 years fixing air conditioners and raising a family and not asking for much. But when she said the name Walt, something in his voice closed like a door. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "He left it to you?" And there was a hardness in it she rarely heard from him. "Hannah, that man broke this family. He stole from his own father, gambled it all away, and walked off to hide at that lake and never once looked back. Your grandfather never got over it. Whatever's in that cabin, I don't want any part of it. And honestly, honey, I don't think you should either." She asked him what exactly Walt had done. Her father sighed the sigh of a man being asked to lift something he'd set down a long time ago. "It was before you were born," he said. "Before I was hardly more than a kid myself." The family had a marina on Half Moon Lake, Bennett Brothers Marine. Your great-grandfather built it with his own hands. Walt and your grandpa Raymond ran it together. And one year a whole pile of money went missing from the business, near $40,000, which back then was a fortune, enough to sink the whole thing. And it came out that Walt had taken it. Gambling debts, they said. Your great-grandfather, my grandpa, he was a hard old man, and he cut Walt off cold. Told him he was no son of his. Walt took the old family cabin as his share and went up to the far end of the lake, and that was it. 40-some years. He died up there, a stranger to all of us. And if you ask me, he earned it. Hannah listened, and she said the things you say, and she got off the phone. But that night she lay awake, and the thing that kept turning in her mind was not the $40,000, or the marina, or the hard old great-grandfather she'd never met. It was the old man under the eave in the rain, with his wet eyes and his shiny coat, saying, "Alice would have liked you." That was not, she kept thinking, the face of a man who had spent his life not looking back. That was the face of a man who had done nothing but look back, from all the way across the water for 40 years. And she decided, lying there in the dark, that before she signed anything or sold anything or let her father's version become the end of it, she was going to drive north and open that box herself. She left on the last Saturday in June, with a duffel bag and a cooler and the lawyer's directions written on the back of an envelope. It was a 4-hour drive that turned, in its last stretch, into something out of an older America, the highway narrowing to a 2-lane road, the 2-lane road narrowing to gravel, the gravel winding down through pines so tall and close they made a green tunnel with the sky at the end of it. And then the trees opened, and there was the lake. Half Moon Lake, curved just like its name, lying still and silver in the late afternoon, and Hannah stopped the car right there in the middle of the road because there was no one else on it, and she just looked at it for a while. Somewhere out across the water, a bird made a long, wavering, laughing cry that lifted the hair on her arms, a sound she had never heard before and would come to love more than almost any sound in the world. That was her first loon. The cabin sat back from the shore under 3 big white pines, small and square and honest, with weathered grey boards and a green metal roof and a stone chimney. There was a screen door, and behind it, a wooden door with a black iron latch. And when Hannah came up the 2 steps and reached for it, half expecting to have to fumble with the key the lawyer had mailed her, the latch lifted under her thumb and the door simply swung open. It wasn't locked. She stood there a second, the key useless in her other hand, feeling as though the cabin had been left open just for her. Though of course she didn't yet know that it had been left open for everyone, for anyone, for 40 years, in case they ever came. Inside, the light came in low and gold through the west windows and lay across a room that stopped her in the doorway. It was clean and spare and cared for. A wood stove, a worn armchair, a shelf of well-read books, a narrow bed made up tight with an old wool blanket, a kitchen table by the window, and the walls. The walls were what undid her first before she ever opened the box. Because the walls were covered, quietly and without any fuss, with photographs of her family. And more than that, of her. There was her 3rd grade school picture, the one with the crooked bangs. There was her high school graduation, clipped from a newspaper. There was a snapshot of her at maybe 6, on a swing set she didn't recognize, that she had no memory of anyone taking. There was even a photograph of her standing at a podium at her college graduation, in a gown, holding her diploma, taken from somewhere far back in the crowd. Hannah stood in the middle of that room and turned in a slow circle, and the story she had been told her whole life began, very quietly, to come apart. This was not the cabin of a man who had walked off and never looked back. This was the cabin of a man who had watched, who had somehow, from 4 hours away, across a silence that had lasted decades, gotten hold of her school pictures and her graduation and a photograph of a little girl on a swing, and had put them on his wall so that he would not have to spend his evenings alone. There were photos of her father, Tom, as a young man. Photos of an old marina with a hand-painted sign. And in the place of honor, over the wood stove, a small framed photo of 2 boys on a dock, squinting into the sun. One of them a head taller with his arms slung around the smaller one's shoulders. On the back, in pencil, it said, "Ray and me, the summer before everything. Half Moon, 1959. She made herself sit down at the kitchen table, and there it was, the shoebox. Just an ordinary shoebox, soft at the corners with age, the cardboard gone furry with handling, and across the top, in a careful, old-fashioned hand, it said one word: Hannah. Not to whom it may concern, not to the family. Her name, written by a man she'd spoken to for 2 minutes in the rain when she was 15. She put both hands flat on the lid, and she sat there for a long time as the light went from gold to rose to the deep, soft blue that comes down over a northern lake. And out on the water, the loon called again. And finally, in the gathering dark, she lifted the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them. Maybe 100. Not in envelopes, most of them, just folded pages, some on lined notebook paper, some on the backs of hardware store receipts, some on good stationery gone yellow. They were stacked and bundled with rubber bands that had gone brittle, and they were in order, she realized, oldest at the bottom, newest at the top, the way a man stacks a life when he has had a great deal of time and no one to spend it on. She lifted the topmost bundle out with both hands, as carefully as if it were a living thing, and she saw that the letters were all addressed the same way. Not, "Dear Hannah," just, at the top of each one, a date, and then the words, "Well, kiddo?" As if he had been talking to her, in his head, across a table, every day for years. She almost couldn't do it. She sat with the first page trembling slightly in the lamplight she'd switched on, and part of her wanted to put the lid back on and drive home and let the old story stand. Because at least the old story was finished, and whatever was in these pages was clearly not finished at all. But then she thought of him, under that eve in the rain, and she began to read, from the bottom of the box, from the very beginning, and she did not stop, except to sleep and to eat and to cry, for the better part of a week. The earliest letters were not what she expected. They were not defenses. They did not say, "I was innocent. They did the family wrong, poor me." In fact, the first ones nearly broke the frail thread of hope she'd carried up there, because in them, Walt seemed to take the blame squarely on himself. "I made my bed," one of them said, "and I've laid in it every night since, and I won't pretend I didn't have a hand in it." She read that, and her heart sank, and she thought, maybe Dad is right after all. Maybe the man was just guilty and lonely and sorry. But she kept reading, because even in those first sorrowful pages, there was something that didn't fit. A note underneath the words, like a room where the furniture has been arranged to hide a door in the wall. Because the letters were, above everything else, full of love for a brother. Not hatred, not bitterness at being cast out, love. Page after page, Walt wrote about Raymond, her grandfather, the way you write about someone you would lay down your life for. He wrote about how Ray had half raised him after their mother, Alice, got sick and passed when Walt was only 14, and their father took to drink and hardness. "Ray taught me to swim off that dock, and to drive, and to shave, and he took a beating for me more than once when the old man was in a mood," one letter said. "Whatever I am, I'm what Ray made." And Hannah, reading this on the third night, with the loons calling and the wood stove ticking, and a stranger's whole heart open on the table in front of her, began to feel the first cold edge of a suspicion she did not want to have. Because you do not spend 40 years worshipping the brother who let your father throw you out for a crime you committed. You spend 40 years like that only if the story is not the story at all. She set the letter down and went out and stood on the dock in the dark, hugging herself against the chill that comes off the water even in June. And she looked across the black lake at the far shore, where, a mile or two away, the little lights of the town of Alder made a low, warm smear against the trees. That was the town. That was where the marina had been. That was where her family had lived and thrived and closed the door on this man. And he had sat here, on this dock, on this water, night after night for 40 years, close enough to see their lights, and never once been asked to cross. She thought about how a person could be exiled to the far side of the very same lake, kept in sight the whole time, like a lesson nobody would let themselves learn. And she thought, there is something in that box he is trying to tell me slowly, because he knew it would be too much to hear all at once. And I am going to have to be brave enough to keep reading until I find it. If you're still with me tonight, let yourself sink a little deeper now, the way Hannah sank deeper into that summer and that cabin and that stack of letters. Because this is the part of the story where the water gets darker and the truth begins to surface, the way things do surface on a lake, slowly, a pale shape rising from somewhere down below, taking its time, until all at once you can see it clearly, and you can never unsee it again. Stay with me. The letter that changed everything was closer than she knew, and so was the one small, living thing that had kept the old man company through all those years. And I promise you, before this night is over, that door left open on the latch is going to mean something you didn't expect. The living thing was a dog. On her second morning, Hannah had woken to a soft, arthritic thumping on the cabin steps, and she had opened the door to find an old yellow Labrador sitting there, grey all around the muzzle, looking up at her with the patient, hopeful eyes of a dog who has been coming to this door his whole life. Around his neck was a collar with a tag that said simply, "Bear." She'd stood there in her socks, and the dog had stood too, and then he'd walked past her into the cabin as though he owned it, which, in every way that mattered, he did. And he'd lain down heavily in a patch of sun beside the wood stove, in a spot worn smooth by years of exactly that. And he'd let out a long sigh. And Hannah had understood that Bear had come home. She learned the rest of it from Ruth. Ruth lived in the only other cabin on the North Shore, a quarter-mile through the pines. A spry woman in her 70s, with a long grey braid and a canoe she still took out most mornings. She'd come walking up the shore path that afternoon with a foil-covered plate of blueberry muffins, and Bear had thumped his tail on the floor at the sight of her. And Ruth had looked at Hannah with eyes both kind and appraising and said, "So, you're the one. He talked about you, you know, for years. I always wondered if you were real." Ruth had been keeping Bear since Walt passed, and she was the one who had found him, gone peacefully in his chair, with a book open on his chest. And she was, it turned out, the only friend Walt Bennett had had in the whole world. Over the following days, in the slow way that summer allows, Ruth filled in the shape of the man around the words in the box. Walt had been a boat builder. In the workshop behind the cabin, which Hannah had not yet been able to bring herself to open, he had built and repaired wooden boats, canoes and rowboats, and the occasional little sailboat, for people all around the lake and beyond. Work of such quiet quality that folks drove hours to bring him a hull. He'd lived on almost nothing, Ruth said. Ate simple, wore his clothes till they gave out, drove that same truck for 30 years, which had always puzzled Ruth, because the man worked constantly and was good at it, and should have had a little money. Where did it all go? Ruth used to wonder. And now, sitting at the table with the box between them, Hannah was beginning, letter by letter, to understand exactly where it had gone. But Ruth didn't know that part yet, and Hannah wasn't ready to say it out loud, because she wasn't ready to believe it herself. She found the first piece of proof on a rainy afternoon, tucked between two letters near the middle of the box, and it made her sit back in her chair with her hand over her mouth. It was a receipt, soft and folded, from a hospital in Grand Rapids, and clipped to it a short note in Walt's hand. "Paid the Bennett girls' hospital bill today," it said. 11,000 and change. She's 9 years old and she had her appendix out and near died of it, and Tommy's insurance is junk, and I heard through Ruth's cousin that they were losing sleep over the bill. Let them think the hospital forgave it. Best $11,000 I ever spent. She's a fighter, that one. Hannah read it 3 times. She remembered being 9. She remembered the terrible pain in her side, and the ambulance, and the surgery, and she remembered, dimly, her parents' faces grey with worry that had not seemed entirely about her health. And she remembered her mother saying, months later, like a small miracle, that the hospital had wiped the bill clean. They'd never understood why. Now, 20 years later, on a rainy afternoon on the far side of a lake, Hannah understood why. And it did not stop there. As she read on, the anonymous kindnesses surfaced one after another, each one folding into the next. There was a note about a scholarship, $2,000 a year, that Hannah had received all 4 years of college from a foundation with a name she'd never been able to find anything about, the Alice Bennett Memorial Fund. She had assumed, vaguely, that it was some small, local thing. It was Walt. He had named it after his mother, her great-grandmother, the schoolteacher, and he had funded it out of the money he made bending wood into boats, and he had arranged it so that it would come to Hannah and no one would know where it came from. She thought of all the times she had sat in a lecture hall or a library, tired and broke and grinding through, never knowing that 4 hours north an old man was building canoes to keep her there. There was more. A note from the year Hannah was in a school play, in the 4th grade, that read, Drove down and stood in the back of the cafeteria to watch the Bennett girl be a tree in the school play. She had 2 lines, and she said them loud and clear, and looked right out at the crowd like she wasn't scared of anybody. Prettiest tree I ever saw. Didn't stay for the cookies, wouldn't have been right. And a note from her high school graduation. And one, the one that finished her for that night, from her college graduation, the same event as the photograph on the wall. Watched the Bennett girl get her diploma today, it said. Sat up high in the back so no one would wonder who I was. When they called her name, I stood up and clapped, and I didn't sit down for a while, and nobody knew why an old man was crying at a stranger's graduation. That's all right. Some things you don't need anybody to understand. She's the first one in this whole family to finish college. Alice would have wept. I did it for her. I did it for both of them. Hannah put that letter down and she cried the way you cry when grief and gratitude and anger all arrive at the same time and have nowhere to go. She was mourning a man she had never known and would now never get to thank, and she was furious at a family, at a whole silence that had let this happen, that had kept this good and gentle man at arm's length across a lake. For 40 years while he quietly, secretly, held them all up from underneath. And she still did not fully know why. She knew he was not the villain of the story, but she did not yet know who was. That answer was near the top of the box now, in the newest letters, waiting. And some part of her already sensed that when she reached it, it was not going to make anyone the simple hero either. It was going to be sadder and truer than that. Out on the dark water, the loons called to each other. 2 long notes and then an answer. The sound of 2 creatures making sure, across the night, that the other one was still there. And Hannah, alone in the lamplight with the box, understood that this was what the letters were. 40 years of a man calling across the dark, "Are you still there? Are you still there?" to a family that never once called back. She did not read the top of the box that night. She wasn't ready. Instead, the next morning, with the sun coming up gold over the water and Bear leaning warm against her leg, she finally walked out to the workshop, the long, low building behind the cabin that she had been avoiding. She unlatched the door, and the smell hit her first. Cedar and pine and varnish and wood smoke, the smell of a man's whole working life. Tools hung on the walls in careful rows, each one outlined in pencil so it could be put back exactly. And in the center of the floor, up on 2 sawhorses, half finished, its ribs bare and pale as the inside of something alive, was a canoe. A beautiful little cedar strip canoe, sanded smooth along one side, the other side still open to its frame. The work stopped part way, as work is always stopped part way when a man does not get to choose the day he sets down his tools. On the workbench beside it, weighted under a chisel, was a scrap of paper, and Hannah picked it up with hands that had learned by now to be careful with anything Walt had left behind. "Started this one in the spring," it read. 16-footer, cedar on ash. Building it light, for a woman to lift alone, not for me. You'll know who it's for when you read the last letter. Take your time with her. Sand with the grain." And Hannah stood in that workshop full of morning light, one hand resting on the smooth cedar flank of an unfinished canoe that a dying man had been building for someone he loved. And she knew, the way you know a thing in your body before your mind will say it, exactly who it was for. And she knew, too, that she could not put it off any longer. That night, she would read the letter at the top of the box. The topmost letters were different from the others, and she had known it without looking, the way you know the last stare in the dark. The paper was newer, the hand was shakier, and the very top one was not dated. "Well, kiddo, like all the rest." It began, "My dear Hannah," and under that, "This is the one I've been walking toward my whole life, and I'm only writing it because the doctor gave me a number of months I don't much like, and a man should not take the whole truth into the ground with him when there's a person left who ought to have it." So she made a pot of coffee she didn't drink, and she pulled the wool blanket around her shoulders, and with Bear's chin heavy and warm across her feet, she read the truth that her family had been walking around for more than 40 years. It began in the fall of 1983, Walt wrote, and it began, as these things do, with a good man who got scared. The marina had been drowning for 3 seasons. A couple of bad summers, alone on a new boat well that came due, the kind of slow financial bleeding that a small family business almost never survives. And Raymond, the older brother, the steady one, the family man with a wife and 3 kids and a name to protect, had gone looking for a way to dig them all out fast. He started betting. First to cover the marina, then, the way it always goes, to cover the betting. Cards at first, then the track 2 hours south, then men you did not want to owe. By that fall, he had lost nearly $40,000 that was not his to lose. Money their father had raised by mortgaging the marina he had built with his own 2 hands. When their father found the hole in the books that November, Walt wrote, it was going to come out. And when it came out, it was going to take everything. Not just the marina. It was going to take Ray's marriage, because his wife had already told him one more debt and she was gone. It was going to take Ray's kids, 3 of them, in a town the size of a thumbnail, where being known as the family that stole and gambled away their own father's business would follow those children into every classroom and down every street for the rest of their growing up. One of those 3 kids, Walt wrote, was your father. Tommy was 11 that year, a quiet, serious boy who loved his dad like the sun came up out of him. And so, at the kitchen table, on a cold night in November of 1983, with their father standing there grey-faced and shaking with the bank statement in his fist, demanding to know which of them had done it, Walt Bennett had opened his mouth and said, "It was me." He said he'd been gambling. He said he'd taken the money out of the accounts over the year and lost it, all of it, and he was sorry, and there was nothing left. None of it was true. Not one word. But he stood there, and he said it steady, and he watched his father's face turn from flesh to stone, and he let the old man call him a thief and worse, and he let himself be cast out of the family that same week because he had done the arithmetic that only he could do. Ray had a wife, 3 children, a whole life with roots down deep, and Walt had none of that. Walt had nothing to lose but Walt. But that was not the whole reason. And Walt was careful, in the letter, to tell Hannah the whole reason, because he wanted her to understand that it had not been a sacrifice made by a saint. It had been a debt paid by a brother. When their mother, Alice, got sick and died, Walt had been 14 and Ray had been 19, and their father had gone into the bottle and the hardness and mostly stopped being a father at all. And it was Ray who raised Walt the rest of the way. Ray who taught him to drive and to shave and to build a boat. Ray who stepped between Walt and their father's temper more times than Walt could count and took the blows himself. I spent 30 years, Walt wrote, looking for a way to pay my brother back for a childhood he gave me at the cost of his own. And that November, God help me, I found it. He gave me a whole boyhood. I gave him back his whole life. I have never once thought I got the worse end of that deal. Their father let him take the old family cabin on the North Shore as his share and told him he was never again to set foot at the marina or in the family. And Walt had loaded a truck and driven around to the far side of the same lake, close enough to see the marina lights across the water, and he had stayed there for the rest of his life. The understanding between the brothers was never spoken out loud, because it never had to be. Ray would keep his family whole, and Ray did. He straightened out. He never placed another bet. He ran the marina honest for another 15 years and sold it well, and moved the family downstate and raised 3 good kids, and one of them, your dad, turned out about as decent as men get. So it worked, Walt wrote. Understand that. It worked. I would tell you it was worth it, even if you were the only person I ever got to tell. Hannah had to stop reading. She got up and walked out onto the dock in the dark, because the walls of the little cabin had gotten too close, and she stood there in the cold with her arms wrapped around herself, and she looked across the black water at the far lights of the town, and she felt the whole shape of her family rearrange itself in the dark. Her grandfather, Raymond, the man she remembered as a warm hand and a peppermint smell and a quiet laugh, the man whose funeral she had cried at when she was 15, was the one who had gambled away the family and let his brother take the fall. And Walt, the thief, the one nobody talked about, the shame of the family, had been the one who paid for all of it, quietly, across the water, for 40 years. It was so exactly backward from everything she had been told that she almost laughed, and then she almost cried. And instead she just stood there and let the loons call out across the dark until she could feel her feet again. And then she went back inside to read the rest. Because there was a sorrow in the letter still to come, and it was not about the money or the town or the exile. Walt had made his peace with all of that, and Hannah believed him, because a man does not build canoes and pay hospital bills for the family that threw him out unless he has genuinely stopped keeping that particular account. No, the sorrow was smaller and far more human than that. "I never wanted an apology from Ray," Walt wrote. "I want you to know that. I didn't do it to be thanked. The only thing I ever wanted in 40 years was for my brother to come across this water one single time. Not to say sorry, not to explain, just to sit on my dock with me on a summer evening and drink a cold beer and watch the loons and not say anything at all, so that I would know, just once more before we were done, that he remembered we were brothers. I kept a chair out there for him. I kept it out there for 40 years. He never came. That's the only thing I'll take into the ground that still aches. The empty chair on the dock." He had meant to come, Walt was sure of it. Every year Ray meant to. But shame is a heavy boat to push off a beach, and pride is heavier. And the longer a man waits to cross a piece of water, the wider that water gets, until a mile of lake may as well be an ocean. And then they were old. And then, in 2012, Ray was sick, and then Ray was gone, and the chair on the dock stayed empty, and that, Walt wrote, was that. He signed that part of the letter, "Your great-uncle, who is not sorry for what he did, only for the beer he never got to share. Walt." But the letter was not finished, because there was one more thing Walt needed to explain, and it was the thing Hannah had been aching to understand since the moment the lawyer said her name. Why her? Why leave everything, the cabin and the letters and the truth, to a great niece he had spoken to for 2 minutes in the rain? And Walt explained it as simply as he explained everything. "You won't remember this," he wrote, "but you crossed a room for me once. At Ray's funeral. I came because I had to, and I stood in the back where I belonged, and not one soul in that church would look at me, which was fair, because they all still thought I was the man who'd ruined them. And then a girl of about 15, in a black dress 2 sizes too big, picked up an umbrella and walked all the way across a gravel lot in the pouring rain to walk an old stranger to his truck. You didn't know me from Adam. You did it because somebody was alone in the rain and you couldn't stand it. That's your great-grandmother Alice all over. She used to say the same thing about a house that I'm going to say to you now, and then I'll let you go. A house stays a home as long as somebody leaves the door open. That was the last line before Walt's signature, and Hannah read it 3 times, and then she understood the door she'd walked through on her first day. The latch that had lifted so easily under her thumb. The door a dying man had left unlocked for 40 years. He had left it open the way his mother taught him, in case anyone in the whole scattered, wounded family ever, on any night, decided to come. I made a decision at that funeral, Walt had written just above the saying, that whatever I had left when I was done, it would go to the girl with the umbrella. Not because you're owed a thing, because everybody in this family learned, somewhere along the line, how to keep a door shut, and you never did. That's rarer than money, kiddo, rarer than a lake. There's a canoe in the shop I'm building for you, light enough to lift alone, so you can always get out on the water when the house gets loud or the house gets quiet, whichever you can't stand that day. Finish it if you want to, or don't. But do one thing for me, if you can find it in you. Bring them back to the water. Leave the door open. See who comes." For a long time after she finished, Hannah did not move. The lamp burned low, and Bear breathed slow against her feet. And out on the lake, the loons went quiet at last, and she sat with the whole weight of it settling onto her. The beautiful and terrible weight of being the one person left holding the truth. Because that was the trap of it, wasn't it? Walt had handed her a gift and a burden in the same box. She now knew that her grandfather Raymond, whom her father Tom had loved and buried and grieved and idolized, had been the one at fault all along. And her father did not know. Her father still believed, as he'd told her on the phone with that hard, closed voice, that Walt was the thief who broke the family. What was she supposed to do with a truth like that? Carry it up here to the lake and then carry it home again and swallow it, and let the old lie stand because it was kinder? Or hand her gentle, steady father a truth that would knock the floor out from under the memory of his own dad? She wrestled with it for 3 days, and they were the hardest days of that whole strange summer. A storm came through on the second night, the real northern kind. The wind bending the pines double, and the rain coming across the lake in grey sheets, and the little cabin creaking like a boat. And Hannah lay awake in Walt's narrow bed listening to it, and feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her life. Which gave her, she realized, the smallest taste of what this man had felt every night for 40 years. In the morning, the storm had passed, and the lake lay flat and stunned and silver. And she nearly packed the car. She nearly put the lid on the box and drove home and let all of it stay up north where it had always stayed. Some doors, she told herself, are closed for a reason. Maybe the kindest thing was to leave this one shut, and then she found the guest book, and the guest book decided her. It was a plain green ledger on a little shelf just inside the door, the kind of visitor's book you'd find at a bed and breakfast, and she had walked past it a dozen times without really seeing it. But that morning, packing, she'd picked it up, and she'd opened it, and what was inside stopped her cold. 40 years of entries, and almost every single one of them in Walt's own hand. He had kept a guest book for a cabin that had almost never had a guest. Page after page after page, a man signing his own visitor's book, alone, just to mark that the days had happened. "Ice out today," one line read, dated in April long ago. Walt. "Alone, but the loons are back," another years later. "2 chicks on the loon nest this year. Wish someone had seen them." Walt. And there, in the spring of 2012, in handwriting gone suddenly unsteady, 3 words and a name that put Hannah on the floor of that cabin with her hand over her mouth. "Ray passed today," it said. "Didn't get the chance. Walt." Under it, the rest of that page was blank, and the next, as though the man had not had the heart to sign his own name to an empty house for a long, long while after that. Hannah sat on the floor of the cabin with the green ledger in her lap, and she understood that she could not, would not, drive home and let the door swing shut again. Because here in her hands was 40 years of a man asking, over and over, in the only way he had, "Is anyone coming? Is anyone coming?" And the whole family's answer had been silence, and she was the only one left who had heard the question. She thought about how a lie can outlive every single person who told it. Their father, gone. Raymond, gone. Walt, gone. Every one of them who had built or carried or been crushed by that old story was dead now, except her father Tom, who still believed it, and her, who now knew better. The silence had outlived almost everyone, and silences are like that, she thought. They keep going long after the people who started them have stopped, rolling on down through the years under their own weight, unless somebody, someday, is willing to stand up and stop them. She decided, sitting on that floor, that she was going to be the one who stopped this one. She was going to bring her father to the water. If you're still awake with me, let your breathing stay slow and easy through this next part. because the hardest thing Hannah did that summer she did with her voice barely above a whisper, on a phone, standing at the end of a dock. This is the quiet turning of the whole story, and it turns not on a courtroom or a confession shouted across a room, but on a daughter asking her father to drive 4 hours north to a place he'd sworn he'd never go. Stay with me. Nobody in this story raises their voice, not once, from here to the end. The loudest thing that happens is a man finally allowed to set down something he's been carrying since he was 11 years old. She did not tell him on the phone. She had thought about it and decided that a truth this size could not be handed to a person through a telephone, in his kitchen, alone, with nowhere to put his face. So when she called her father, she only said, "Dad, I need you to come up to the lake. There's something here you have to see. And I can't bring it to you. It has to be here." And Tom, of course, said no. He said it kindly, but he said it flat, the way he'd said everything about Walt. "Hannah, I told you, I don't want any part of that place or that man. Whatever you found, throw it in the lake for all I care." And she'd stood at the end of the dock, with the phone pressed to her ear and the loons starting up their evening call behind her. And she'd said the one thing she knew would reach him. "Dad, I found Grandpa Ray up here. I found the truth about Grandpa Ray, and it's not what you think. And you are the only person left in the world who gets to hear it, and you have to hear it here. Please." There was a long silence on the line, so long she thought the call had dropped. And then her father, in a voice she had never heard him use, small and uncertain as a boy's, said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Just come. Please, Dad. Bring nothing. Leave Saturday morning." There was another silence, and then he said, "All right." He came on a Saturday in the middle of July, and Hannah watched his truck come down through the green tunnel of pines and stop, just as she had stopped, at the place where the trees open and the whole lake lays itself out in front of you. He sat in the truck for a good 2 minutes before he got out. And when he did get out, her big, steady father, 54 years old, a man who had fixed 10,000 air conditioners and never once made a fuss, stood beside his truck and looked at that lake with an expression she couldn't read at all, something between dread and hunger, the look of a man seeing a face he'd worked very hard to forget. He'd been a boy here, she realized. Before 1983, before the shame, this had been his family's whole summer world. The marina and the water and his dad and his uncle, and he had loved it. And then it had all turned to poison, and he had spent 40 years not letting himself remember that he'd loved it. She went to him and hugged him, and he held on a little longer than usual, and then he said gruffly into her hair, "All right, show me." She did not hand him the truth all at once, because Walt had taught her, through the box, how to hand a person something heavy. She walked him inside first, and she watched him stop dead in the doorway exactly as she had, at the walls, at the photographs, at his own boyhood face looking back at him and, beside it, his daughter's whole life, the school pictures and the graduations and the little girl on the swing. Tom stood in the middle of that room and turned in a slow circle, and she saw the first crack run through 40 years of certainty. "This is his cabin," she said quietly. "The man who never looked back. Look at whose pictures are on his walls, Dad." Then she sat him down at the kitchen table and she made coffee. And she started, not with the terrible letter, but with the hospital receipt. She put it in front of him, the soft, folded paper, and the note clipped to it in Walt's hand. And she watched her father read that his brother's exile, his family's villain, had quietly paid the $11,000 hospital bill that had nearly broken Tom and his wife the year their daughter almost died. Tom read it twice. Then he set it down very carefully, the way you set down something that might be live, and he said, in a voice that had gone strange, "Where did an old boat builder get $11,000? And Hannah said, gently, "He built canoes, and he lived on nothing, and he saved it for us, Dad. For 30 years. And then she brought out the scholarship, the Alice Bennett Memorial Fund, and she watched her father remember the mystery money that had helped put his daughter through college. And she watched him understand where it had come from. And then, and only then, when the ground was already soft under him, did she put the top letter in his hands, the one that began, "My dear Hannah." And she said, "Read this one out loud, Dad. I think he'd want you to be the one to say it out loud." And Tom Bennett put on his reading glasses, with hands that were not quite steady, and in the low gold light of his estranged uncle's kitchen, he began to read the truth about his own father. Hannah would remember that hour for the rest of her life. She would remember the way her father's voice held steady through the first part, the marina and the debt, because that was just history, and then began to come apart when it reached the kitchen table in November of 1983, and the 11-year-old boy at the edge of it, who had loved his dad like the sun, came up out of him. She would remember him reaching the part where Walt explained why he did it, the childhood debt, the brother who raised him. I gave him back his whole life. And having to stop and take his glasses off and press the heels of his hands into his eyes for a long moment before he could go on. And she would remember, most of all, the part about the chair. When Tom read the words, "the empty chair on the dock," the chair his father had never once crossed the water to sit in 40 years. Her big, quiet father put the letter down on the table and lowered his face into his hands and wept. Really wept. The deep and shaking kind that comes up out of a place a man has kept locked for most of his life. He cried for a long time, and Hannah did not try to stop him or fix it, because some things are not to be fixed, only felt. And when he finally lifted his head, what he said was not about Walt at all. It was about Raymond. "My dad," he said, wiping his face with the flat of his hand. "My dad, at the end, in the hospital. The last week, when he wasn't always making sense, he kept saying a name. We thought he was confused. We thought it was some old friend. He kept saying, 'Walt, I'm coming. Tell Walt I'm coming.' Over and over. 'Walt, I'm coming.'" And Tom looked at his daughter, with his face wide open and 40 years undone, and he said, "He was trying to cross the water. At the very end, he was trying to get to that chair, and he couldn't. He couldn't make it. And nobody in that room even knew what he was talking about. Oh God. Oh Dad." And there it was, the last piece. The one that let Hannah love her grandfather again, even as she saw him true. Raymond had not been a monster. Raymond had been a frightened young man who made a ruinous mistake and let his brother pay for it. And then a proud, middle-aged man who could not find the door back. And then a dying old man whose very last words, half out of his mind, were an attempt to finally cross a lake he'd been afraid of for 40 years. He had carried it the whole time. He had meant to fix it the whole time. He had simply, like most people, run out of time before he ran out of pride. It did not excuse it, but it made it human. And human was something Hannah found she could forgive. That evening, Hannah and her father did the thing that Raymond never managed to do. She took 2 beers out of the cooler, and she led her father out to the end of the dock, where 2 weathered wooden chairs had sat side by side facing the water for 40 years. One of them the chair Walt had worn smooth, the other the one he had kept empty all that time for a brother who never came. And she and Tom sat down in those 2 chairs, the one that had held a lonely man for 4 decades, and the one that had waited just as long. And they did not say very much at all. They watched the sun go down red and gold behind the far pines. They watched the light leave the water. And when the dark came down soft and complete, a loon called out across the lake, long and wavering and unbearably lovely. And a moment later, from somewhere off in the blackness, another loon answered it. "Are you still there?" "I'm still here." And Tom Bennett let out a long breath that Hannah felt she had been waiting her whole life to hear him let out. Before they went in, her father took the green guest book down off its shelf, and he uncapped a pen, and under 40 years of a lonely man's solitary entries, he wrote, in his careful working man's hand, "Tom Bennett came to the lake at last. Walt, I'm sorry it took us so long." And then, after a moment, he added his father's name too, the way you'd pull out a chair for someone. Ray Bennett too. He made it, Walt. He finally made it. It was the first new hand in that book in 14 years. The rest of that summer and the year that followed it was the slow and gentle work of a family finding its way back to the water. And this is the part of the story, if you've stayed with me this long into the night, that I hope you carry with you down into sleep. Because it is the part that mends what the rest of it broke. Tom went home and did the hardest thing of all, which was to tell the truth out loud to people who had believed the lie their whole lives. He called his sisters, Hannah's aunts, who had scattered downstate and across the country and half out of touch, tangled up in the old shame without even remembering all its details. He told them what was in the box. He told them about the hospital bill and the scholarship and the chair on the dock. And one by one, over that winter, the doors that had been shut for 40 years began, quietly, to open. They came slowly at first, the way deer come out of the tree line, one and then another, each one testing whether it was safe. An aunt drove up from Indiana that first August, a woman named Diane, who had been a teenager during the worst of it, and had spent her whole adult life with a knot in her stomach whenever the family name came up. And she walked into that cabin and saw the walls full of pictures and sat down on the floor and cried for the better part of an hour. A cousin Hannah had never even met came the next month, and then another, curious, wary, drawn back to a lake most of them barely remembered. And every single one of them, without being asked, walked over to the little green guest book by the door and signed their name. Because by then, everyone in the family understood what that book was and what 40 years of one lonely hand in it had meant. Ruth came to every gathering that whole first summer, of course, because Ruth was family now, in the way that the people who stay are family. And she would sit on the dock with her long grey braid and tell the newcomers stories about Walt that none of them had ever gotten to have. The time he built a canoe for a little boy dying of a bad heart, so the boy could see the lake from the water once before he went. The way he fed every stray dog and lonely widower on the North Shore. The fact that in all the years she knew him, she had never once heard him say a bitter word about the family that cast him out. He just kept the door open, Ruth would say, and shrug, as though that explained a whole man. Which, Hannah had come to believe, it did. There presided over all of it that summer like an old king, moving stiff and slow from lap to lap, accepting scraps and ear scratches as his rightful tribute, sleeping in his worn spot by the cold wood stove while the cabin filled up around him with the voices it had waited 40 years to hear. He was very old, and everyone could see it, and when he passed that following winter, gone peaceful in the night by the stove with a house full of the smell of people who loved him still hanging in the air, it felt less like a tragedy than like a good dog finally allowed to rest because his work was done. Hannah and her father buried him in the spring under the big white pine where he'd always napped. And Tom made a little wooden marker for him, and Hannah planted something that would flower, and that was the first grave any of them dug at that lake, with the whole family standing around it instead of one man standing alone. Over that winter, Hannah and Tom finished the canoe. They drove up on weekends through the snow, and they lit the wood stove in the workshop, and together they learned how to steam the last pale ribs of ash until they could bend them into the curve of the hull, and how to fit the cedar strips tight, and how to sand the whole thing smooth, with the grain, always with the grain, the way Walt's note had told them to. Neither of them had ever built anything like it, and they made mistakes, and they figured it out the way Walt must have figured out his first one 60 years before, by ruining a few pieces of wood and paying attention, And on a bright, cold Saturday in March, in the workshop where a dying man had left it half-finished, Tom and Hannah Bennett turned that little cedar strip canoe right side up and set it on the floor. Done, gleaming under 3 coats of varnish. And Hannah lifted it by herself, easily, the way Walt had built it to be lifted, light enough for a woman to carry down to the water alone. She had to set it back down pretty quickly because she couldn't see through her eyes to carry it anywhere. And here is the part I've been saving for you. The part worth staying awake all the way to the end of the night for. A year on, in the deep green heart of the following summer, the loons came back to Half Moon Lake and built their low nest in the reeds off the north shore, the way loons do, returning to the same water year after year because a loon mates for life and does not forget where home is. And that year they raised 2 chicks, 2 little dark smudges riding on their mother's back across the still morning water. And this time, when the loon chicks came, there was someone there to see them. There were, in fact, about a dozen someones, the whole reconnected sprawl of the Bennett family, standing on the dock in the early light, passing a pair of binoculars hand to hand. And a child, one of the cousins' little ones, whispering, "Look, look, there's 2 of them." Hannah thought about the entry in the old guest book, the one from years and years before in Walt's lonely hand. 2 chicks on the loon nest this year. Wish someone had seen them. And she thought, somebody's seeing them now, Walt. A whole family's seeing them. We're all here. That was the summer the old guest book finally filled up. It had taken 40 years for Walt to fill 3/4 of it alone, and it took the family a single year to fill the rest. Page after page of names and dates and little notes. First swim of the year. Caught a bass off the dock this big. The whole gang up for the 4th. Somebody's crayon drawing of a loon. A wedding proposal that happened right out there on the water. And when the last page was full, Hannah bought a new one. A fresh green ledger, just like the old one. And she sat down alone at the kitchen table one evening, with the loons calling outside. And on the very first page of the new book, before anyone else could sign it, she wrote the line her great-grandmother Alice had said, the line Walt had left her at the bottom of his last letter. A house stays a home as long as somebody leaves the door open. And under it, she wrote all their names, every single one of them who was there that weekend, a whole page of Bennett's. And she left the door of the cabin open while she did it, on the latch, the way it had been left open every night for more than 40 years. Because Hannah kept the cabin. Of course she kept the cabin. She had thought, that first strange week, that she might clean it out and sell it and be done. And now the thought of it was almost funny to her. She spends her summers there now, every one of them, in the little square, honest cabin on the North Shore. And she still teaches her 3rd graders the rest of the year. And she tells them, when the season is right, about the loons that come back to the same lake every single year because they know where home is. She takes the canoe out at dawn most mornings, the canoe she and her father built out of the one a dying man left half-finished, and she paddles out onto the flat silver water among the mist, light enough to carry alone. And she sits out there where the loons are, and some mornings, if you were on the shore, you might see her lift a hand off the paddle and hold it up for a moment toward the empty middle of the lake, the way you'd wave to someone you can't quite see but know is there. She never locks the door. That is the one thing she will not do, and her father understands why, and neither of them has ever had to say it out loud. The door of that cabin stays on the latch, day and night, summer and winter, exactly the way Walt left it, so that anyone in the whole wide, scattered family, on any night they finally find the courage, can come down the road through the pines and lift the latch with their thumb and walk into a warm room full of pictures of the people they belong to, and know, without anybody having to say a single word, that they were expected, that a place was kept, that the door had been left open for them. It turned out the door was never really about keeping anyone out or letting anyone in. It was a message, held open for 40 years, that said, over and over into the dark, "You are still one of us. Come home whenever you're ready. We saved you a seat. And if there's a thing to take from this story down into your sleep tonight, let it be a small and quiet one, because Walt was never a man for big lessons. Only this: a silence can outlive every last person who started it. The people who build a wall between two brothers can be 40 years in their graves, and the wall will still be standing, still doing its cold work on children and grandchildren who never even knew what the fight was about, unless one person, somewhere down the line, decides to stop carrying it. It doesn't take much to stop it. It doesn't take a fortune or a lawyer or a grand confession in front of a crowd. Most of the time, it just takes somebody willing to cross a little water, or pick up an umbrella in the rain, or leave a door open on the latch, and wait, and see who comes. Forgiveness, Hannah came to understand out on that quiet lake, is not a verdict you hand down. It's a door you leave open. That's all it ever was. Out on the water, as the last of the light goes and the far shore turns to a low, dark line of pines, the loons are calling to each other again, the way they do every northern night. One long, wavering note, and then, from somewhere across the black, the answer. Are you still there? I'm still here. Are you still there? I'm still here. It is the oldest question in the world, and the only answer that has ever mattered. And on Half Moon Lake, at last, after 40 years of one voice calling into the dark with no reply, there is always, now, someone on the far shore to call back. The chair on the dock is never empty anymore. The book by the door is never lonely. And the door itself stays open all night long, on the latch, waiting. The way a good man once taught his whole broken family that a home is supposed to be. So rest now, wherever you are. Let your breathing stay slow and even, in and out, like water moving against a wooden dock. If there's a door somewhere in your own family that's been shut a long time, a silence that's outlived the reasons for it, you don't have to open it tonight. Tonight, you only have to rest. But maybe, somewhere down the road, when you're ready, you'll think of an old man on a far shore who kept a chair and a door and a whole heart open for 40 years. And you'll pick up the phone, or the umbrella, or the pen, and you'll be the one who finally calls back across the water. Sleep well. The loons will keep watch. And I'll see you here again in the next one. Before you drift off, if this story kept you company tonight, it would mean the world if you'd tap the like button and subscribe, quietly, so the next person looking for a soft place to land at the end of a long day can find their way here too. And I'll leave you with something to sleep on. No need to answer tonight. If you were Hannah and you found those letters, would you have told your father the whole truth about his own dad? Or would you have let the old story rest in peace to spare him the pain of it? There's no wrong answer, only an honest one, and I'd love to hear yours in the comments when you wake. Tell me too, what state you're listening from and how old you are, because I always love knowing who's out there on the far shore tonight. Sleep well and leave a door open somewhere. You never know who's finally ready to come home.